area. So one has to look at that. Let me ask you a last question. We are practically out of time. How do we see the Shanghai Cooperative Council playing out in this scenario? And they were expanding their membership, as you know. And Condoleezza Sarai said, we think of Afghanistan as a member of SARC and not of the Shanghai area. And we see them as part of South Asia, not part of Central Asia. I asked actually the Afghan ambassador, why didn't you seek full membership in the Shanghai Cooperative Council? He said, no, we are observers there. But you can go back and look at the dates. It was after Condoleezza Sarai drew the line. They moved this way and not that way. Given that Shanghai Cooperative Council is there as a counterweight to this whole issue of American presence, how do you see SARC shaping up and Shanghai Cooperative Council shaping up?
It's tempting to view these associations that exist as alliances against something. It is a counterweight of sorts, and it's a healthy counterweight. I think the Shanghai Cooperative Organization is doing good work. It finds ways to reconcile the interests of China, Russia, and several Central Asian countries, and they have overwhelming common interests. All countries are taking a very sensible approach. So I think that will continue. Joining in South Asia into that would be tricky. I mean, there are some ways that it might work.
I'm saying, how do you see SARC playing vis-a-vis Shanghai Cooperative Organization, given that U.S. insisted Afghanistan should join SARC and not the Shanghai Cooperative Organization?
SARC, regrettably, is a less functional international organization at this time than the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. I think there's less of a conflict. The conflicts among the member states are much less in the SCO, and therefore the organization works well. SARC may move to that if the civilian movement, not necessarily Zardari, but I think all of the civilian parties have loosely similar ideas right now in Pakistan. If that somehow consolidates, maybe not in the entire territory of Pakistan, but in large parts of it. But if in a hopeful scenario there, SARC might work better. And then there are all kinds of pipelines that could be built, all kinds of cooperative agreements. Trade between India and China is growing quite rapidly. India is China's fastest growing trade partner. That is, there's no question that India and China have to work together. There's simply no other possibility, and it's just obscene that they should not. These are the two largest nations in the world. Great civilizations. They have, and they have no particular need to expand. We don't live in an age of the 19th century where you have to grab resources. So there's not even an incentive to expand in the way that world powers of the past few centuries have. So I think India and China, it's been a rocky relationship, but there's grounds for optimism. That I think China's willingness not to veto the nuclear deal at the nuclear suppliers group suggests that China is willing to permit India to play a role, maybe not quite at its own level, but somewhat closer to its own level than it was earlier. So India is not going to get to China's level next year, but it would like not to be permanently blocked from that level. And if such agreements can come about between India and China, it can be the basis of much wider circuits of cooperation. India and Russia already get along pretty well. China and Russia get along pretty well. So there's a lot of scope for cooperation in the larger Asian region in the future.
Last word.
I think I agree with that. I think it is in the interests of the region for close cooperation and collaboration between South Asia, China, Russia. I would add, if the Americans were ever to permit it, the whole Far Eastern bloc, Japan, possibly a unified Korean peninsula, would shift the relationship of forces globally. Japan is still not permitted its own foreign policy. It's an occupied country. Unlike Europe or the Germans, who are quite independent, the Japanese have not been permitted that. And there is a big fear in the United States amongst policymakers that were they to move out of Japan, there would be a temptation to have a strong Far Eastern bloc, which economically is, of course, very, very significant. So I think that is, I mean, the world is changing. There's absolutely no doubt about that. I think U.S. hegemony cannot be sustained indefinitely. And you just look at the map of the world and the economies. You know, China now is the workshop of the world. This is a country which is supplying large parts of the world and is playing that global role. India is trying to move forward, though I would make one point. An Indian analyst told me, he said, China has problems in Tibet and it has problems in the Muslim region, minor compared to Tibet. In India, he said, 35% of our countryside is occupied by the Naxalbari people and peasants there. There are movements there. But these movements can be talked with, actually, and sorted out what their demands are, etc. It's happened in Nepal. There's no reason why it can't happen in India. But the general trend is towards more regional cooperation. And I think that is the way of the future.
On that positive note, we'll conclude this discussion for today, and it will continue in many more sessions. Thank you. Thank you for coming.